Hi, my name's Ali, and this is the Russophiles Unite podcast, where we watch Russian films and films with a Russian connection. This time we're doing something a little bit different. We're not watching a film, instead, I'm here to introduce a conversation I had with Olga Doletskaya, who is season manager for Kino Klassika, an amazing film foundation here in the UK. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Olga. Hi, Olga. Thank you very much for joining me. So, first of all, could you tell us a little bit about Kino Klassika and what the organisation does?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Basically, Kino is a film foundation and we highlight films from Russia, the Caucasus, Central Asia, so kind of the post-Soviet region. And we've done a lot of interesting film seasons, and basically since the pandemic happened, we couldn't do any events or kind of real life film screenings. So we're launching a streaming platform called Klassiki that's starting in February 4th. And so that's what I'm kind of here to talk about.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so I've been to a couple of Kino Klassika screenings in
Oh,
London, although you've done
nice.
them all around the UK. And the last one that I went to was literally on the 8th of January
Mm-hmm.
last year. It came up on like I don't know whether it was a Instagram or like a Facebook or, one of the many platforms memories. I was like, oh, that was only a
Yeah,
year
I
ago.
know.
It feels like such a long
Mm-hmm.
time. Just the pace of time at the moment in kind of like pandemic world is very different and strange. But yeah, it's an organization that I'm so glad for its existence because it means that people get to, or in normal times, get to see these amazing films on the big screen. So,
Yeah, I know. Not a lot of people know kind of what Russian cinema is. I feel like
mm,
mostly like people in the UK just think it's like, oh, Tarkovsky,
yeah.
just
So
like
it's like post World War Two, you've got Tarkovsky, and then before that, you've got Eisenstein, and then that's your Russian cinema. And like
yeah,
maybe if you're super switched on, you've seen some of Andrei Zvyagintsev films, but there's a lot
yeah.
more there as well.
Yeah,
And
it is a Tarkovsky old man with a moving camera, and that's kind of,
right, of
yeah.
course, yeah. Yes, and then of course it's important to say that Kino Klassika does not just like post-Soviet films. There's a lot of the films, probably the majority even, have been stuff from the Soviet era, which it's just wonderful seeing like the breadth of stuff that was produced because it wasn't just Tarkovsky and kind of arty stuff.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so we've done some restoration work as well on some lovely films, but we kind
Mm,
of do both the classics from the Soviet times, and also try to showcase some newer stuff, some post-Soviet stuff that people normally don't expect from Russia. I think it's very much like it has to be very artsy and very serious, and people don't really expect like a lovely comedy to be a Russian film. Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's kind of like people's national stereotypes kind of like only accommodate like two or three traits. So it's kind of like sense of humor? Russians?
Yeah,
Really?
literally.
Okay. At least to British people and probably to Americans as well. People just kind of like think Ivan Drago from the from Rocky Four, and
Yeah,
that's sort of
yeah.
like our picture, unfortunately, which is quite sad. But yeah, I'm really glad that Kino Klassiker is doing a lot to rectify that and sort of show a broader side to Russian cinema and kind of by extension, like, can you even talk about the Russian character? But Russian culture as a whole, rather than just this kind of like distorted version that we often like have in our stereotypes.
Yeah, we definitely try to represent a little bit kind of different sides of the Russian character, and kind of just also show films from like different regions, and kind of show that, there are in Central Asia there are many different countries, and all of them do drastically different films. And Armenia and Georgia have amazing film collections, that amazing classical films both in the Soviet times and now. that the UK kind of standard UK audiences haven't really heard about, and hopefully we can highlight.
Yeah, like I recently saw on Mubi Maria Sarkin's film The Lighthouse, which I understand Kino Klassika has been involved with the restoration of that, and that is just an absolutely beautiful film, and I'm so glad that more people will get to see that.
Yeah, we that happened before my time at Kino,
Mm,
but we helped restore the film, and then it kind of we want to think that we kind of saved that film a little bit from, like, oblivion, because not a lot of kind of film people have heard of it, but after we restored it, clearly there's demand there to screen it, and including movie. That's very, very lovely that it's represented there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It is a great film.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of in the vein of Tarkovsky, I guess, as far as like the visual style, but yeah, definitely its own thing as well. And of course, it's like a Russian, I guess, I don't know whether it's a Russian Armenian co-production or whether it's just mostly shot in Armenia. I mean, and of course, Maria Sarkin herself was Armenian, but like spent most of her life in living in Russia. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to distinguish those things, because when we've been working on the streaming platform, and kind of the question of which film should belong in which country is such a kind of complicated question, because the boundaries are quite blurred. Like, is Danelia, he's a Georgian director, but he filmed, films like I Walk Around Moscow, um,
Mm,
which is a classic Russian. It's about Russia. It's he filmed some he made some Georgian films with Georgian actors, but it was still kind of more, he worked with Mosfilm, and it was kind
mm.
of more of a Russian, I guess, led, Russian produced films, even if it was about Georgian characters and he was Georgian. So yeah, it's a bit kind of like, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very kind of blurred with, like especially in the like fall of the Soviet Union times, because everyone is like primarily Soviet, but then they've got their sub nationality, which I guess not necessarily everyone from the West would know that on your Soviet passport you had a category that was nationality, and that was like your kind of like ethnic background, I guess. So,
Yeah, definitely. And then also kind of, I think some people felt more like they belonged to the nation than others. I think
right,
it really
right.
depends on like who kind of how you, if you associated with being Georgian or Armenian, or you were just like a Soviet comrade.
Right,
Um,
right, yeah.
yeah,
And then
it
people
is another
moved,
world.
yeah, yeah, and then people moved around a lot. So I mean, like Sergei Parajanov, I mean, I think he was born in Georgia, but his family were ethnic Armenians, and I think he studied film in Moscow, but did a lot of his work in Ukraine. So it's kind of like,
Yeah, it's also very much like there wasn't a lot of infrastructure. So if you
mm,
wanted to study film, you probably would go to,
the center.
yeah, to Moscow, to Geek, and there wasn't a lot of kind of regional studios didn't have as much autonomy and as much resources as like Mosfilm and Lenfilm,
Mm,
and Gorky Film. So a lot of people would go, but then like come back, like Kira Muratova,
right.
because she stayed in Odessa and filmed in Odessa like most of her life, even though I believe she studied in Moscow. Probably, I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think I'm like 95% sure that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a bit here, but people who've heard episodes of this show before will kind of know that that's how it works. But how about you and your role at Kino Klassika? Because you've joined relatively recently, but what have you been doing?
yeah. So basically, me joining is a bit of a weird story, because I'm a social anthropologist, so very far from film. I finished my master's at the University of Edinburgh, and I've kind of been looking for things to do.
Sure.
And my friend sent me a tweet from one of his friends with like a notes app screenshot of
Oh,
someone
okay.
of someone kind of saying like, oh, like this, I know this, like this company is looking for volunteers. If you were into film, you should help them. And I was like, oh, I'm into film. I love film. And also, obviously, I'm Russian, so I have the, I can speak both languages. I could be really helpful and I have nothing else to do. And then I met Justine, who's our founder and director. And I just kind of found myself home. It was just like such a lovely team, and they're doing such lovely work. So I started in September, and I started kind of editing like contracts, like translating bits, doing bits of curating. And then we were planning this January film season of Russian comedies. And the premise for that was, everyone thinks Russian films are so serious and Tarkovsky like.
Yeah.
And we want to show that Russian comedies also exist, even though half of the comedies were really also quite tragic.
They kind of have to slide that element in of like the national stereotype.
Yeah, because we were watching so many films trying to decide which ones would be good for the season, and we kept just being like, "Oh, this is a great film, but is it really a comedy?" And we just kept being like, "Is it? I don't think so."
There are lots of jokes, but it kind of ends on a downer, kind of thing.
Yeah, it really always does. So basically, working on that, I became the season manager for the season, and the season just kept being pushed a little bit forward,
Yeah.
and then it's just in the end, because of we've been working on the streaming platform as well, and I kind of became more involved with the streaming platform, and then because of this lockdown, we've realized it was planned to happen in March, but we've kind of realized it's probably not going to happen. There's a very low possibility, and so we're going to stream some of the films on the platform kind of as it launches. So my work didn't quite, my work still made it.
Yeah, but just in a slightly sort of different form, yeah.
Yeah, made it to the big screen, but in a slightly different form. So right now, I'm kind of I guess, researcher, curator, a little bit communications manager, because I do most of the communications with the Russian studios and looking for film rights and kind of doing all the contracts and communication with them, like calling them, because it's a bit easier for me to do being a Russian speaker.
Right. You're not doing it in a second language and like having to go, I don't know what this word is.
Yeah, which is also like everyone has like a kind of a basic understanding of Russian, and Justine she's very good, but it's still like it's less work for me than for her, so I'm just gonna do it.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, she has an interesting story as far as like her like getting involved with Russian films as well. Like, I understand that like I guess it's getting on for 10 years ago. She starred in a Russian film, and therefore had to like learn Russian for the role.
I'm not sure if it was a Russian film or she just had to speak Russian for the film, or maybe it was like a co-produced or something, but she just like learned Russian from scratch.
Just, as you do.
As you do, which is very impressive for me, because as a Russian speaker, if I wasn't a native Russian speaker, I would never learn Russian, because that sounds really complicated. Like, that sounds so hard.
Yeah. I mean, I joke that Russian is a language that doesn't want you to learn it.
That's a really good description. It really doesn't.
Because I feel like, I mean, my Russian is really like, it's intermediate on a good day, and it's also incredibly rusty. But yeah, just like it's a very steep initial learning curve. Yeah. Anyway, so we've got this comedy season being sort of incorporated into the launch of the streaming service. Could you tell us a little bit more about what else is going to be on there?
Right. So basically, the streaming service is very exciting. It's basically going to be a permanent collection of around 60 titles of kind of more classics and more like Soviet time titles, with some exceptions, from Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, and some Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. We don't quite have all the titles confirmed yet, but hopefully very soon, because the launch is very soon. We're completely calm, not stressed at all.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, so we
Perish the thought.
but we have a permanent collection, and then we will have picks of the week, which are just one film highlighted every week for and streaming for 1 week only. And that's going to be more modern titles and more kind of like hopefully more exciting, but also those that maybe you wouldn't necessarily, I don't know, not, I don't want to say wouldn't pick yourself, but kind of like that need a bit more explaining, that kind of like that all the nice background information that we provide is going to be super helpful. And kind of like the fact that it's only 1 week is going to kind of push you to like watch this kind of long and maybe, a little bit dark, a little bit Tarkovsky style film, but then you're going to really
More challenging, shall we say?
yeah, let's say more challenging. Yeah, but some of them are also light and fun. But yeah, so we're going to
Sure,
have
of
a
course.
permanent collection, pick of the week, and then with every title we have a lot of background kind of information. So we'll have links to different articles, and we translated a lot of interviews from different directors. So we have like subtitles for all of those, and we'll have like blog posts and like bibliographies for further reading on some of the films. So we just kind of give you hopefully a nice context to watching all of these films, because I feel like you really, especially for some of the classics, you really need to know some of the context and like, oh, this was the 50s, this is how much censorship affected this is kind of the director's biography, this is where they came from. We'll have program notes for everything. So yeah, it's quite like a curated education experience as well.
Sure, it's like you're providing like the keys to the building. It's kind of like there's this wonderful building, but it's got all of these locked doors, and unless you have the keys, you're going to be like, well, I'm sure that room's interesting, but I can't get into it. And then just having this context is kind of like, oh, I can get in and like enjoy that room now because I have like the background knowledge. Sorry, this is a rather
Yeah,
tortured metaphor
yeah,
here, but
literally, yeah. But it's very true, because I think Russian and kind of like Soviet cinema is so interesting, but it's very hard to read about. A lot of kind of like
yeah,
besides kind of the main classics, it's quite hard to find information on. A lot of it is in Russian. It's very hard to find
indeed.
subtitles. So we've subtitled a lot of films ourselves. So everything will have correct English subs, which is very very nice.
That's the other thing is like like regular listeners to my show will sometimes hear the complaint that I make that like, well, I watched a version of this on YouTube and the subtitles, were understandable and I know enough Russian to kind of like, oh, okay, I see what they meant there. But yeah, sometimes it is a little bit of a stumbling block is just the availability of stuff in English. And yeah, it's
And you don't get like the wordplay and the little jokes. And yeah, and like for me, I only know Russian, so some of like Armenian and Georgian films I still haven't watched because we're waiting on the subtitles to
right,
to
right,
be
right,
done.
right. Yeah.
So I'm actually quite excited for the launch, because I'll have a chance to watch all of these films that I haven't watched before, because I couldn't, because I don't know the language.
It would essentially just be like, oh, well, just watching it for the pictures. Which, hey,
Yeah,
it's cinema, like, it's a visual medium, but yeah. Um,
yeah, sometimes you have to just like kind of judge by the picture and be like, oh, it's probably a good film. Some of our team, obviously, like some know Russian very well, but
hmm.
some kind of know a very basic level of Russian, which is not enough to watch films, which is very annoying, because then they can't appreciate, I'll be like ranting about a film and it's only in Russian. But yeah, so basically subtitles, very exciting, and then like all of the materials that are kind of framing all of the wonderful films. And then we're doing free February and March are going to be free for basically to access everything on the platform. And then starting from April, we're rolling out a subscription model, which will mean that you'll still get the core, I think, 30 films of the permanent collection for free, and they will always remain free. And then the additional half of the films and the pick of the weeks are going to be in the subscription model.
Sure, sure, sure. So, and then how about in the kind of like medium to long term future of the platform? What's kind of coming down the pipeline?
So basically, we're kind of trying to move both in the direction of bringing in more seasons and more like themed like groups of films, and also becoming more educational, adding more materials, because for now we kind of have like our bases covered, but we would like to translate more things and hopefully maybe do some interviews ourselves, because we are in contact with a lot of great directors and great actors and filmmakers from Russia. So someone, maybe me, might be traveling to Russia when the borders finally reopen to do some exclusive interviews. And then kind of season wise, obviously I'm the LGBT specialist in the group, but we're kind of all quite interested in queer film. So we were thinking of at some point doing a themed, this is very much it's still in the works, still processing, but we really want to do a little season of queer Russian and post-Soviet films to show maybe around Pride, maybe a little bit later, but that's happening. And we were thinking also of doing some book to film adaptation series of a few films as well, maybe like a mini season.
Of course, yeah, with like such a rich literary tradition and,
Yeah,
many adaptations. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, so that's kind of it all depends on kind of what films we can get and what relationships we build with different studios, because obviously there are kind of core titles that a season wouldn't be possible with, like some core amazing titles. So we'll see about that.
Cool. And I was going to ask this earlier and it kind of like passed by, but I wanted to ask, like, as far as like working with the Russian studios to secure like the rights and the content itself, like how challenging is that?
It's not as challenging as you would think. The main thing is that everyone is called Olga.
I'm laughing just it's a laughter of recognition, because, as many listeners will know, I worked as an English language teacher, and I did find that Russian naming conventions are very, very conservative, shall we say. So it's kind of like a pool. I mean, obviously the possible pool of names you can be picking from is pretty large, but in terms of like what practically people choose from, like, it's really quite small. It's like about 6 or 7 female names and about 6 or 7 male names. So like, yeah,
it's very true. It's very true.
Lots of Olgas and lots of Katyas in my experience.
Lots of Marshas as well, quite a lot of,
That's
at least
true.
in my kind of age group. But I laugh a lot because like my friends in the UK would be like, "Oh, you have such a unique name." No one really says that, but people are like, "Oh, like that's quite a pretty name." And I'm like, "Listen, you don't know. Everyone back home is called Olga." So we literally have a joke at this point, because we had Len Film, Gorky Film, and a third studio, I forgot, maybe Dovzhenko, and all of the people that we were talking to were named Olga. So we had like a little joke of like, oh, like guess which the studio contacted. Like we contacted the studio, who's the contact person, guess the name. It's Olga. It's always Olga. We had like Olga number 5, Olga number 6, but apart from that, it's been less kind of challenging than you would expect, but also different studios have very different kind of, not even terms, but kind of they are, how do I say it? But so basically Mosfilm is a really big studio, so they ask for more money, they kind of require more attention and more, like they know how incredibly important they are, and they know that without their titles, we're not going to have a platform. Even in the nicest way possible, their films are absolutely amazing, and we're very lucky to have them. But just kind of like, Autumn Marathon, Office Romance, Carnival Night, Kinzaza, every Danelia or Razanov title, that's almost film. So you kind of can't really have a diverse platform without them.
Yeah, it's gonna be like very obscure if Mosfilm aren't on board.
Yeah, literally. So kind of like they're very, very precious, a very precious kind of group. But then, obviously we're like all of all of our studios, but some studios were kind of much more easygoing and much kind of more like, oh, like we have quite a few cartoons from Film, some really great animations. And they've been just incredibly lovely and just so like easygoing and so open. And they were just like, you know, offering us like loads of different options. And they were like, oh, like maybe you want this or like that extra, you know, animation. And then that compared to the contemporary titles that are absolutely impossible to hunt for. We've like, it's been weeks where we've been trying to find who has the rights to like 2 or 3 films that we just can't hunt down because we keep contacting this studio and they say contact this studio and they say, oh, actually we don't have the rights. And then it's just a big kind of, because after kind of the age of the studios ended with, you know, the Soviet Union, it's just been a big free for all. And it's very hard to track down because also rights get rebought and companies get, you know, out of business. And yeah, that's just a bit of a mess. But the big old studios are great. And all of them have Olgas on board, which I love. I love a good Olga.
Awesome. So yeah, I thought it would be remiss of me before we go not to ask what your, like, I know it'll probably be hard to choose, but your like personal favorites of the stuff that we've got, to come. That's
right. Do you want like a top 3 or like one from every country or top 5?
Like...
Actually, I don't think I can do one from every country, but I can do a few.
Yeah, how about like a personal top 3 and then like maybe some like favorites from like beyond Russia?
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Okay.
I'm just being greedy, you know.
Personal top 3. I'm a big fan of contemporary titles, and that's I really appreciate the classics. They're very good, but they rarely make it to like top 3. So I'm going to say Arrhythmia, which is a 2017 Hleebnikov title, which is really, really nice. Then Pechki Lavachki, which is not a contemporary title. It's a Shukshin film.
Okay.
I want to say 80s, but I actually don't remember. In English, it's translated as Happy Go Lucky.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
I have heard of that.
Yes.
I just hadn't heard the Russian title. Yeah, because Arrhythmia I'd heard of, and obviously the Russian title's very similar.
Yeah, so Pechki Lavachki. Pechki is the ovens, and Lavachki is like what you sit on in like trains. Like,
oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's translated as Happy Go Lucky. That's a really funny, it's a really funny one. And then maybe I think I'm gonna go with an Uzbek title, Tulpan. It's
Tulip, right?
Yes, Tulip. It's a 2008 title that is really, really just beautiful and just very kind of in the same. If you've seen Mikhalkov's, what's it called? Urda Territorie Любви. But in English, it's like heaven something. It's in Mongolia. It's shot in Mongolia.
Right. It's like very late 80s or like very early 90s. Yeah. Yeah, not seen it, but like heard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also very good. But Tulpan is kind of in that kind of realm, but made by an Uzbek director and with Uzbek actors. And that's just completely different kind of, I don't know, just a different aftertaste when it has this kind of cultural background behind it, and it's absolutely beautiful. So I'd say these are the 3, although I can change my mind at any moment.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of mean making you pick favorites.
Yeah, and then as like an additional regional title, I'd say Blue Mountains. It's a Georgian comedy. I'd say maybe 70s, but it's not a very well-known title. But we're gonna have it on Klassiki, so you can check it out.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that one's new to me. Yeah.
It's basically just this amazing, I don't know how it went through the censorship. That's kind of the beautiful thing about regional cinema in the Soviet Union, about different nations, that some kind of films in Georgia and Armenia maybe went through the censorship a bit easier than
Mm.
That's my personal theory.
Yeah, yeah. Was there a bit of well, how many people are really going to see this anyway kind of attitude going on?
Yeah, quite possibly, or maybe just like there wasn't as much of like, as many eyes watching as Moscow
Mm.
and St. Petersburg. But basically, Blue Mountains is the story of this guy writes a book, I think, and he's trying to get this book published in this publishing house. So it's just the whole story is just him going through all the hell, absolute hell of Russian bureaucracy, which is just very relatable, is just very recognizable. Well, obviously it's not Russian, it's Georgian bureaucracy, but Soviet bureaucracy.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just he just keeps going to the same people, and they all, tell him to go to other people, and then it's just round and round in circles. And it gets funnier and funnier as you go. And then I'm not gonna spoil the ending, but it ends in a way that's a very kind of obvious metaphor of kind of how the Soviet bureaucracy is going to end ultimately.
Oh, really? Wow.
And that's why I'm kind of like very surprised that it went through the censorship.
Yeah, it's funny. I literally this weekend just watched Carnival Night, and I was just like, how did this get made in 1956? I mean, I know they just had the secret speech and things were starting to open up, but it's kind of like,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, like, Eldar Rizanov must have had absolute, like, balls of steel to be like, yeah, so the main antagonist is a bureaucrat and he's just an idiot. And the whole
Yeah.
film is just going to be everyone like dragging him and like pointing out how stupid he is.
There's a really famous anecdote, and I'm not entirely sure if it's true or not, but there's an anecdote about Kinzadza.
Oh, okay, yeah. Very much on my watch list. Haven't seen it yet, but
It's very good. It will be on Klassiki. But basically, it's this obviously Danelia's really famous kind of sci-fi film that's quite risque for the time, because it's kind of
hmm.
it's not as straightforward because it happens on a different planet, but it's also quite
There's a certain subtext going on that, like, yeah, this is set somewhere else, but does it remind you of somewhere that you might know?
exactly, yeah. So basically, to make it go through censorship, allegedly he at the very end of the movie he stitched a scene of like a massive explosion, or like earth exploding or something to that extent. So something very drastic, and definitely not something that censorship would allow. And they were so absolutely shocked by that ending that they completely forgot about most of the movie. So they were
Yeah,
incredibly,
it's all relative, isn't it? So you see this like massive, well, we definitely can't allow that, and then it just kind of that focuses all of their attention. I mean, I
exactly.
hear stuff like this happening, like in the Hays Code era of Hollywood, where
Mm.
they'll put something in that they just like know the censor's just going to jump on, so they can sneak the actual thing that they want in the movie
Yeah, exactly. So
past.
so
So
allegedly they were just like, you can't have that in. This is terrible. Like that's you have to cut the entire ending off. So he did obviously cut that bit, and then the
hmm.
the film managed to pass through the censorship untouched.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so like this is just a decoy, so you just kind of like go for that instead.
Yeah, so it really kind of, I think, made a lot of filmmakers very sneaky, very smart in the ways they try to present their work and kind of cover up things. And like there's a lot of like really smart metaphors in Soviet film that I think maybe we don't get as much of today,
Mm.
because they just had to hide their tracks really well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that going back to like providing the context just makes that even more important of like, okay, so this is the thing that you need to know. Like with, for example, Welcome or No Trespassing, which is like a personal favorite of mine.
Oh, I love Welcome and All Trespassing.
Oh
Yeah.
man, it's such a shame that L.M. Klimov is mainly known in the West for Come and See, which don't get me wrong, it's a masterpiece.
I've actually never seen that. I hate to admit.
Maybe wait till the pandemic is like somewhat better because it's such a downer,
Mm, yeah.
as you might imagine with the subject matter. But it's not a film to watch, necessarily if if like you're kind of
If the world is on fire.
yeah, it's not a film to make you feel better about life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's so sad that he's mainly known for that, and like seemingly nobody in the West knows about this like beautiful and incredibly subversive comedy that he made like right at the beginning of his career. So yeah, I
Yeah.
really hope that that's that's going to be featured at some stage. So that's me kind of like
Yeah, it was definitely on the list, but obviously we can't get everything that we want. But now we have a
sure, of
very
course.
extensive list of things that are next on the list as soon as we can.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did I did love that film. But yeah, I was listening, obviously in preparation for this, I listened to a couple of your episodes.
Oh, okay.
Very, very, very lovely, and I think I will continue because they actually gave me a lot of interesting ideas. But I was listening to the Office Romance one.
Oh, yes, with Michelle Birdie. Yeah.
Yeah, that was such a good episode. But I was just thinking, I didn't know this, that when they were reading, you'll have to remind me because I don't remember. But they were reading a poem to each other, the two main characters, and the poem was not kind of the official poetry, kind of a bit of a
Oh, right. Yeah, it's long enough ago now that I can't even remember what who the poem was by. But yeah, the
yeah,
fact that it was kind of like not a sort of like approved
yeah. Me
author.
me
Yeah,
me neither. Was it maybe Brodsky? I'm not too sure.
that sounds plausible.
Yeah, well,
Certainly.
but like that kind of like I didn't even realize that that was a nod to like them
Mm,
both being kind of intelligentsia and like you know in the circles of not quite conforming to the main agenda, to the main
yeah,
regime.
or sort of like doing the outward like at work and around the place. You kind of like keep up the sort of like
The face.
diligence, yeah, face,
Mm.
but like behind, behind closed doors and in your private life, you kind of have some kind of like not officially sanctioned kind of interests and pastimes and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, exactly. And you kind of like you don't even get these little nods unless you lived in that time, I feel like, because like obviously I've
Mm.
never lived in the Soviet Union, so I don't really know which, authors were which. Well, kind of
Mm.
do a little bit, but yeah, it's
Sure, but
interesting.
you don't have like the level of like aha instant like recognition that like contemporary audiences would have had. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like me and like my parents or my grandparents just have like completely different brains in that regard. Like they
Yeah.
they have this like very quick understanding of what like what was in the context allowed and what wasn't. And I'm just guessing.
Sure. And what was sort of like, yeah, it's not banned, but it's also not exactly approved of. It's kind of like, okay, you like this, that's not enough to do anything to you, but it's
Mm,
also enough for us to be like, okay, I've got my eye on you, like slightly more so
mm.
than we've got our eye on on everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there's those weird little things like in Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears, where the sort of like stodgy husband shows up to look for Alexei Batalov's character when he's kind
Mm,
of like stormed off in a huff, and he's just asking questions around the flat. And no one says it, but the subtext when he's asking around the neighbours is that he's a KGB agent, because
yeah.
that's who a random stranger kind of like asking these impertinent questions would have been. So that's why everyone kind of like is so on edge when they're talking to him.
Yeah.
And just that was
Hmm.
a sort of like, you'd just know that if you're a contemporary audience. So it was kind of like a little kind
Yeah.
of gives it a little extra kind of edge, I guess.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And
Um,
then like on the other side of that, there are a lot of things that are a bit like in retrospect, you think like all of those were put in because, certain people like censorship wanted a certain thing to be mentioned.
hmm.
And then like I'm thinking I Walk Around Moscow,
Okay, right,
which
yes.
is Danelia's 60, maybe that around that time film. No?
I want to say it's like 63, 64, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
I've not seen it yet, but I know that it has a very, very young and, so young he's pre-moustache, Nikita Mikhalkov, which I've not seen it yet, but it is also just the concept of him without like this giant like like broom of a
Yeah,
moustache
it's the
is
only
very
the
odd.
only chance you get in seeing him without the mustache. That's
Yeah.
nowhere else is that possible. But there's yeah, he's super young in that. Actually, there's a story about the film that they were casting the film originally, and they were thinking about Nikita Mikhalkov, but he was too young. But then they gave the script into the censorship, whatever, Goskino agency, and they took so long to approve of it that Nikita Mikhalkov has grown up enough to play the lead.
To actually get the role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard another thing where he asked for more money and they were like, no, in that case, we'll get somebody else. And then he kind of like broke down in tears and like begged for forgiveness and was like allowed back on. That may be totally apocryphal. But...
I mean, honestly, that sounds like him. But he was.
Yes.
But what I was thinking about is that in the beginning, there's a scene in a church that basically one of the main character kind of runs into a church to, I think, maybe like search for someone, or he was chasing someone. But basically the scene is very, very obviously mocking people who go to churches and kind of religion in general, and it's just kind of almost this, like, making the sacred space, like filming in the sacred space and making it kind of as comedic as possible. And that's, I don't know what Donelia's views were on religion, but I'm guessing that it was more of a nod towards, we're doing everything right, we're very much on the Soviet agenda, please let this film through, because it wasn't really a part of the film to make fun of any church. I don't think so. It's not part of the plot. It's just kind of a random moment in the beginning of the film.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where if it had ended up on the cutting room floor, it wouldn't like fundamentally affect the plot in any way. Kind of thing.
Yeah, literally.
How interesting. But yeah, cool. Well, Olga, thank you so much for your time and telling us about Kino Klassika and what you're all up to. And yeah, really excited about the platform.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, this was a lovely little conversation, and please come visit Klassiki. And let me know what you think of the collection.
Of course, yeah, definitely will do. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us, and do svidaniya, folks.
Do svidaniya.
I hope you enjoyed this special episode. If you're interested in finding out more about Kino Klassika, you can find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and their website is www.kinoklassikafoundation.org. You can find more about Klassiki by using the link in the show notes, where you'll also find the contact details for this show. Take care and speak to you soon.